Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 23rd of March 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Michael Robinson, Brian Gerrish, and we're also joined by David Scott. David with Northern exposure, of course, and reporting from north of the border. Well, a love affair, Mike.
Potentially. We should probably offer a health warning before putting this image up, but here we are.
Yes, he's after them.
Yes, after them. Not sure which he prefers, but this is Monsieur Macron. Theresa May meeting Macron and Merkel yesterday. What were they up to? Well, she provided both of them with a detailed update on the investigation into the reckless use of military nerve agent of a type produced by Russia on the streets of Salisbury, apparently. She said there'd been positive identification of the chemical used as part of the Novichok group of nerve agents. Blah-de-blah-de-blah. It goes on, and she outlined our knowledge that Russia had previously produced this agent, and Russia's record of conducting state-sponsored assassinations, and our assessment that Russia views some defectors as legitimate targets for assassination. So this is what she was talking about in this when this photograph was taken, and they all look deeply engrossed in whatever she was saying.
Well, engrossed maybe, but there's plenty of pictures of her laughing and joking, particularly with Mrs. Merkel. So we've got these serious events. We've got Operation Barbarossa underway, but they're over there laughing and joking.
But of course, this was on the sidelines of the European Council meeting yesterday. Theresa May not at the European Council today. So this is the day when they're deciding on how they proceed with Brexit and so on. She's not invited to that meeting. She was there yesterday. But one of the big issues, David, let's bring you into the programme straight away. One of the big issues is fishing, and of course, fishing industry a big part of Scottish industry. So. The Scotsman here, the headline is Indie Scotland won't rejoin EU if bad fishing deal, says SNP MSP. What is going on? Is the SNP considering staying out of Europe? Because then previously they've said no, if Britain leaves and there's independence, we're going to get back in as quickly as possible.
Well, the policy is to agitate for breaking up the United Kingdom because we are so in love with the EU. And the policy is simultaneously to say that we will not re-enter the EU unless they give in to our demands on fishing. So the policy is incoherent. The idea that you negotiate with the EU is really quite touching that anyone would believe that. When the EU says negotiate, they mean the transitional arrangements. There is no negotiation with the EU. That's the nature of the EU. No one's told John Mason.
Right, okay. And the Scotsman also saying that the Danes are demanding the right to fish in UK waters under whatever deal comes out of this.
Well, we've seen this, and we've seen the protests in London, that fishing is actually the industry which was harmed most rapidly and most directly when we entered the EU, and is going to be the largest bone of contention as we come out, because it's going to be the bellwether. If we do what's right by our fishermen, then Brexit is real. So, well, that's where the fight has been this last week.
Well, indeed. So Theresa May said that they'd made good progress on the withdrawal agreement, but also she was looking for a new dynamic in the next stage of the negotiations, so that they can ensure that we do work together to develop a strong future economic and security partnership, which she believes is in the best interests of the UK and the European Union. What that means is that she's aiming for exactly the same economic and security partnership as we've got at the moment. But the European Council issued the sort of outcome from yesterday's meeting. They said that trade in goods with the aim of covering all sectors and seeking to maintain zero tariffs and no quantitative restrictions with appropriate accompanying rules of origin in the overall context of the free trade area. And so they're expressing concerns about Donald Trump's so-called protectionist measures. They're talking about, but you know, in the context of the UK and the EU, they're talking about a framework for voluntary regulatory cooperation. I'm sure there's many oxymorons within that one sentence, Brian. A framework for voluntary regulatory cooperation. No, it's not voluntary. If you're cooperating on a regulatory basis, it's not voluntary. So anyway, the future partnership should address global challenges, in particular the areas of climate change and sustainable development, as well as cross-border pollution, where the Union and the UK should continue close cooperation. The future partnership should include ambitious provisions on movement of natural persons. So they're going to keep the borders open, is what they're saying. The future partnership should include ambitious provisions on the movement of natural persons based on the full reciprocity and non-discrimination amongst member states and related areas such as coordination of social security and recognition of professional qualifications. In other words, it stays the same, absolutely the same as we are at the moment. They go on to say law enforcement and judicial cooperation in criminal matters should constitute an important element of the future EU-UK relationship in the light of the geographic proximity and shared threats faced by the Union and the UK, taking into account that the UK will be a third country outside Schengen. The future partnership should cover effective exchanges of information, support for operational cooperation between law enforcement authorities and judicial cooperation in criminal matters. Strong safeguards will need to be established to ensure full respect of fundamental rights and effective enforcement of dispute settlement mechanisms. In other words, it'll stay the same. And so it goes on. I mean, I could read on, but I'm not going to bore you with it. Brian, every document comes out, leads us to the destination of being in the same position that we were before we started this journey.
Yeah, but there's something else, Mike, which is, of course, is the language being used. We're not even listening to or reading documents that are actually written in English. This is a sort of European Union newspeak where words are twisted. They don't have the meanings which they traditionally had when they were used in this country. So most people don't even understand the language, let alone what's hidden within the language. And just to pass it back to you briefly, David, this is not an accident. The messing around with our language is a key part of how they're actually deceiving people and changing, literally brainwashing us, I think.
Yes, newspeak is real. In changing words, they are essentially eliminating the ability of the public to analyse, to ask the right questions and to realise what's being done. That's all part of it. Kudos to the UK column for calling this one in the outset and putting the narrative out there that Brexit is false and it's not going to actually see any real change. That's, as every day passes, that's becoming a stronger and stronger narrative.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, just say that what we were talking about fishing, somebody in the chat room said, well, we got a warship to blow these other fishermen out the water if they dare to start fishing in British waters, to which I smile and remember my fishery protection days when, of course, the Royal Navy was used as an instrument for the European Union to actually help decimate the British fishing industry by imposing those EU fishery rules. So we've got to get clear of the EU. And at that point, at that point, we'll bring this one in. And we've got a gentleman called Trevor Court, MC, David Ellis, very keen that we put this tweet up, and I can understand why. Our Prime Minister will urge a meeting in the coming days to bring EU military leaders together in what will be known as an EU military union. We need to stop this. And this is a really wonderful tweet because what it shows is that the message of EU military unification as it is now moving around amongst the veterans. They're seeing through the rhetoric of Brexit with no exit. And we're finally starting to see people homing in on the fact that if we lose our military, and that is the plan, it doesn't matter what discussions take place in Brexit.
Okay, here are two delightful individuals. We've got Penny Mordaunt on the left and Boris Johnson on the right. Save our terrorists is their message. They're really concerned about what's going on in Eastern Ghouta at the moment. And so they've felt the need to release a joint statement on their position. They say the situation in Eastern Ghouta is heartbreaking. Assad's regime, backed by Russia, is progressively laying waste to opposition-held areas. What they mean by that is terrorist-held areas. Tens of thousands of people have fled. and with no independent monitoring or provisions for civilian safety, those fleeing are vulnerable and at risk of mistreatment and abuse by the regime, including being detained, disappeared, and separated from their families. And so it goes on. Now, let's have a look at some of the British press on this. Here's The Independent. This is a typical example. Syrians stream out of eastern Ghouta as Assad army warns death is coming to those who stay behind. And they say that, basically anybody that's left behind is going to end up being killed. I'm labelling this absolutely as fake news, and we'll explain why in a second. Because perhaps if we look at RT's coverage of this, we get a more balanced picture. What they're saying is that over 5,000 civilians have left eastern Ghouta through humanitarian corridors on Thursday and more today. This includes so-called militants. So 5,000 civilians and 1,500 militants so far have left through this. There is a deal with the Assad government for them to leave through these safety corridors. And it also, the deal includes that Arar al-Sham, for example, should share a map of their underground tunnels and the burial sites of Syrian troops with the government. And as I say, it's planned that 1,500 fighters and 6,000 of civilians in total will be evacuated as part of the second wave of evacuations. Now, one of the things that the Independent article had said was that the army and the Russians had been assaulting eastern Ghouta, had killed more than 1,500 people in a relentless bombardment with warplanes, shells and rockets. Well, Vanessa Beeley is in Damascus at the moment and was telling me last night, what she said was it's raining missiles here, and this is missiles coming from the terrorists in eastern Ghouta into the I don't want to say demilitarized, but unmilitarized areas of Damascus. She said that local people there are saying that this is the worst case ever. It's the worst situation that they've faced so far. So these people in eastern Ghouta, the terrorists that are there, are not going quiet. Some of them are going quietly. Some of them are leaving through the humanitarian corridors, but quite a number of them are not going quietly. And for the Independent to suggest that Assad is committing some form of genocide in what he's saying is missing the point completely. So Independent guilty of fake news again, I allege.
Yeah, and I would say they're not missing the point. They know what they're reporting. This is deliberate misreporting of what's actually taking place on the ground.
David, some good news. Apparently John Bolton is back.
Hooray! John Bolton is back. We don't have any more worries. This is called draining the swamp. That's quite strange, isn't it? Because it's really like pouring sewage into swamp. But never mind. We've got the Harrods here giving actually quite a good explanation as to who John Bolton is and what he's about. They say John Bolton served as UN ambassador under George W. Bush and is now Trump's national security advisor. And they've got some quotes that give an idea of what we're getting here. Quote from John Bolton: "The Middle East peace process has long needed clarity and an injection of reality, and Trump has provided it by making the decision to move the US embassy in Israel to Jerusalem." That one's arguably true. I think that's mostly true. Another quote here: "Just a matter of empirical reality, the two-state solution is dead," Bolton told Breitbart. That is also true. Bolton even called for a three-state solution in which Gaza would be handed over to Egypt and the West Bank returned to Jordan. And here, these are ideas which are certainly worth exploring, but it's not all good. Tough on Iran seems to be the issue. Our goal should be regime change in Iran, Bolton told Fox News at the beginning of the year. Regime change in Iran. This goes so well, as you know. America, again quoting Bolton, "America must craft a new reality that reflects the actions of the Iranian regime." And he also advocated for Israeli airstrikes on Iran. So maybe some reality when it comes to Israel and Palestine, perhaps, but a complete lack of connection between reality and Bolton's position when it comes to Iran, war, and the reckless endangerment of human life.
Yes, absolutely. Now, First of all, this is from Common Space, but first of all, who is Robin McAlpin?
Excuse me. Well, he's a writer for Common Space and supporter of independence. And Common Space are very leftward leaning, very independent supporting, an organisation that certainly on things like the economy, I would disagree with every day of the week and twice on Sunday. But lo and behold, I find myself in agreement, and it's a very unusual thing. He's looking at the position that Nicola Sturgeon's taken over Russia, and he just can't believe what she's done. She's aligned herself with SNP foreign policy, with Theresa May over Russia, and this is quite critical because Nicola Sturgeon, much as I disagree with everything that she advocates, because it's postmodernism, it's left-wing authoritarianism, she advocates, amongst other things, Scottish independence, although I would argue that what she's selling is fake. But at least on one level, she's trying to get power. And on that level, viewed in that way, everything she does, every major decision she makes is an error. She was wrong over Brexit. She's wrong over the EU. And here, there's been a gift given to her by the Theresa May government, the gift of being able to distance herself from Westminster and illustrate in a very practical way to the Scottish people how rule from Edinburgh could be different from rule from Westminster. And this was just an open goal. And what did she do? She's gone on side by side with Theresa May. She's going on an anti-Trump line, and she's going in the press talking about Scotland being prepared for chemical attack. It's ridiculous.
Well, let's hope. Let's help that line along, and just have a little look here at the decontamination aspects around Salisbury. Now, I'm going to recap what we did a few days ago. We'll do it very quickly, and then we'll move on a bit. So let's have a look at what we were talking about. Apparently, Porton Down and the British security services were unable to identify a Russian nerve agent, Novichok, for some days. Keep that in your mind as we go through the rest. No containment zone was established, nor were the public warned of the immense contact contamination risk posed by a militarized nerve agent. That's what we were told. This is a militarized nerve agent. Days later, advice comes in to wash clothes and double bag clothes that need dry cleaning in response to a weaponized nerve agent. Okay. Declaration of individual locations such as a car park ticket machine suddenly became contaminated, but without a containment area. I said this is incompetence or fantasy, and I stand by that remark. So where do we go next? Well, let's come in here. We've now got BBC and other press reports stating that Skripal's contaminated car was initially taken to a local car pound. It was left there, so that placed the public at risk. We've got civil and military decontamination teams dressed in the full protective suits of freely mixing with unprotected police, military and civilians. Incompetence. No decontamination stations for the protected personnel have been observed. Now, this is very important. If you go mixing it with nerve agents, the moment you've gone near them, you have to be decontaminated yourself. No sign of that happening. Salisbury and surrounding area has had over now 25 millimetres of rain in March, and yet they're still walking around swabbing articles because there's apparently persistent dust. I'm going to say this is, well, we could ask lots of questions about that. No basic washing down of surfaces or use of absorbent powder has been observed. So none of the basic military drills has taken place whatsoever. And how does this work? Because we're told it's a high-grade nerve agent. Where do we get to now? Well, the Mail Online understands that police are to appeal for a, quote, higher grade of suit that affords greater protection because of the presence of Novichok. The suits worn by the police at the moment are fine for investigating when they're used like, this is the Mail's own text, so don't pick me up on this, raiding drug laboratories or handling more basic chemicals. So apparently the police gear is not even suitable of being used if we're dealing with nerve agents.
They must be falling down in their droves then.
Well, one would have thought so, Mike, but apparently they're not. The clean-up in Salisbury will also take several months because Novichok was designed specifically to avoid detection. So now we've got this amazing chemical which the Russians developed many, many years ago. We didn't really understand it, so we haven't got the gear to detect it, but we do know that it's what's been used in this case. Well, we don't, and we'll come on to that in a moment. Forensic teams will have to instead painstakingly swab every surface in areas of potential contamination. They're going to go around with little bits of cotton wool, wiping down every bit of the public infrastructure, Mike.
But that says before the public are allowed back. But are the public being prevented from accessing certain locations?
Certain locations they are, but in general, life goes on in Salisbury, despite the fact that a nerve agent's been used, if you believe this story from the British government. Given the extent of this operation, the number of potentially contaminated sites that have been sealed off, it's likely to be a very thorough process that could take several months.
Right.
Okay. So let's go on. On this occasion, there are several sites which are taking many days to investigate, so much so that stocks of biochemical suits used by the police are in danger of running low. But they're still upright. Forensic teams will have to instead painstakingly swab. Okay, we did that one. Given the extent of this operation, the number of potentially contaminated scents, it's thorough process. They keep pushing these statements through. The problem is that the CBRN incidents are typically used on one site. So what they're saying is if there's a normal chemical incident that these people have to deal with, it's usually one site and they can deal with it. In this case, it's so many multiple sites that they don't even know how many there are.
Right.
But people are still running around.
Right.
The clean-up in Salisbury will also take several months because Novichok was designed specifically to avoid detection. Okay, they push that one, and it cannot be identified via handheld chemical detection equipment. Push, 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 push. So let's put this together in one part if we can. We've got Skripal and his daughter poisoned with nerve agent, allegedly Novichok, but no equipment was available to identify it, apparently. Can that be true? No. How can we have a defence in the country against chemical weapons if we have no equipment? As with any nerve agent, Novichok is highly toxic in minute quantities, posing a risk to anyone touching the victim or their clothing or being coughed upon or touching bodily fluids. You go near this stuff, you die. As to be expected, therefore, the policeman who apparently did touch them, he's been in hospital, although they're just releasing him. But we've got a second policeman now who's had, quote, minor skin irritation.
I wasn't aware that there was any opportunity for minor skin irritation in this
With a
case.
militarised nerve agent?
No,
but this is what's reported in the press. So the Skripal car and the contaminated truck were left in the public space, as we've already mentioned. When Skripal and his daughter were taken to hospital, they would have been handled by a range of paramedic and hospital staff. Why have none of these individuals suffered from nerve agent poisoning? The police were poisoned. Why were none of the other staff that handled them? Skripal's treated by an unnamed consultant. I find this significant. We're not boasting of the qualifications of the man treating these two people. It's an anonymous person. And then Public Health England advises washing clothes and the double bagging of dry cleaning clothes against a nerve agent attack. This is fantasy, Mike. And it gets better because now we've got Salisbury NHS Trust Chief, Ms Charles Barks, saying that 48 members of the public attended Salisbury Hospital for assessment and have been given advice. That advice for nerve agent exposure is not detailed.
No.
So the advice they were given is, well, go away and have a bath. I don't know. And this is where it gets interesting because in a statement by Porton Down Chemical and Biological from Porton Down chemical and biological analyst, he said that blood samples from Mr. Skripal and his daughter were analysed and the findings indicated exposure to a nerve agent or related compound. So basically they were saying, I'm sorry, there's a slight...
it says the sample tested positive
tested, that's right, yeah.
For the presence of a Novichok class nerve agent or closely related agent.
Yes.
So they're not admitting that this is Novichok. They're not saying that this is Novichok then.
No, And now we can begin to see why there is this catalogue of actions which cannot be true if it was a nerve agent. Porton Down knew it was a nerve agent, but the police were then employed with inadequate hazmat suits. How does that work? Don't know. Police in inadequate suits swab down disparate contamination sites with no proper containment boundary and no formal widespread decontamination with Fuller's earth, which is a sort of clay which absorbs these sorts of chemicals, or by power washing down. Never mind the rain, there's been no power washing down, and there's no mention of atropine, which is one of the basic countermeasures to these sorts of poisons. And I'll end here before we open it up to yourself and David. Have a look at this article from Craig Murray, because he calls Boris Johnson a liar, because Boris Johnson states that Porton Down had identified it was Novichok, but what Craig Murray has established is evidence that was presented in court when they were discussing whether further blood samples could be provided to the OPCW organisation. And the bit we got to look at is this, because that is where the quote is. The Porton Down chemical and biological analyst, he said blood samples taken from the two were analysed and the findings indicated exposure to a nerve agent or related compound. The samples tested positive for the presence of a Novichok class nerve agent or closely related. That was the statement in court. But of course the government at the moment is not admitting what's actually occurred.
No, quite the opposite. And in fact, the UK ambassador in Russia was giving a briefing in Russia yesterday, where he was simply. I had considered putting it on the programme today, but I figured, we've heard what he said so many times before from so many other people. It was just a regurgitation of the line. No additional information, no additional facts. And it seems like they honestly believe, David, that the more times they repeat this message, that perhaps at some point somebody might begin to believe it. That's one thing. And the other thing is just to say once again that if we take a step back and look slightly objectively at what's going on here, I see parallels to what's going on in Syria with the white helmets in the way that the PR machine has come into operation, and what we're seeing is simply not real.
Yes, and there's parallels to the run up to the Second World War as well. I mean, there was lots of kind of fakey false flag type attacks going on then. And I don't think the public are buying it. There was a fire in Glasgow yesterday, and I was watching this news coming in on Twitter, and I spotted someone had tweeted out, "Found in Sauchiehall Street," and it was a cigarette lighter bearing the name Vladimir Putin. So people are laughing at this narrative. It's just not believable.
Yeah.
Okay, well, a quick advert for the NHS conference. I'm going to continue to ask for help from viewers and listeners to promulgate this conference. There has never been anything like it before. There is a need for people to talk about what's happening in the NHS and with wider healthcare. Venue is the Albert Hall, Nottingham, on the 12th of May. You can get tickets through the UK Column site here. And we just say more details will be coming out very shortly about these speakers, but these are essentially new speakers, some really amazing work that these people are doing. And if you've got any concerns at all about the way the NHS is going, what's happening to hard-working people in the NHS, then this is the conference for you and your friends.
Okay, we've got to start adopting children faster, Brian. We've got to do it much faster. So 5 new regional adoption agencies have been granted £3.4 million by the government as part of the government's ambition to create a world-leading adoption system with faster matching, so children are placed in loving, stable homes more quickly. So this additional funding is going to 17 councils to speed up the matching process between children awaiting adoption and adoptive families. And who's involved? Well, Kent, so it's Kent, Bexley and Medway, Cumbria, Durham, Sunderland, Blackpool, Lancaster, Harrow, Bromley, Redbridge, City of London and Slough, Surrey, East Sussex, West Sussex, Brighton and Hove. So apparently this model also provides more support for adoptive families going through the process and for those considering adoption, as well as helping to improve the quality of services locally. Now, this might sound to most people to be quite reasonable, but we just bring people's attention once again to Sir James Mumby, who was in the press a couple of days ago, expressing concerns once again of the secrecy in the family court system, which seems to allow judges, he says, to get away with making what he calls mistakes. We have seen plenty of evidence to suggest that they're not mistakes at all, that in fact there's the judges accepting perjury in court and so on, children being stolen from homes and put into the adoption system. So he was speaking at an event last Tuesday, and he said that judges were grotesquely overworked, that they were tired, and so more likely to make mistakes. But in a previous conversation, James Mumby had made the point, Brian, that in many cases when parents that are subject to these types of proceedings, when the proceedings are completed, that they come out of court basically not really understanding what has happened to them. So this process for parents who are having children taken away from them can be so brutal that they come out effectively traumatised.
It is brutal, Mike. There's no question of it, and I'm not quite sure where Sir James Mumby is coming from on this, because, as you say, tiredness, no. Incompetence, possibly, but when of course a court refuses to take video evidence of the abuse of children, then we're into a very interesting situation, and that's happening up in the Midlands. And of course we've got the case that I reported on yesterday, where a man was trying to set up business to film children being abused, and he says, don't worry, because the ultimate clients are top politicians. There's been a wall of silence over that Southwark Crown Court case. So I think Sir James Mumby needs to answer a lot more detailed questions. We can also ask what he actually discussed when he went into that East European embassy a couple of years ago and had secret meetings over child adoption issues.
Yeah, David, it seems to me that what's going on here is that we've got a £13.4 million bung from the government to help develop an industry, and we might use the word trafficking in a certain way, in a certain sense, with regard to what's going on here.
Yes, where does the money? Why is the money needed? Where does the money go? It is an industry. It didn't used to be an industry. It used to be a personal commitment to help another human being, to help a child. And the question I've asked via Twitter, my local authority, because they're always tweeting out about a new campaign for adoption. The question that they don't ask is, how many is the children up for adoption? Are they against the wishes of the parents and against the wishes of the child? And that's, well, you're not meant to ask that.
Well, indeed, you're absolutely not. Okay, let's move on to this one then. Leveling the playing field. This is the latest report from Demos. And who's written it? Well, it's a guy called Matt Rogerson, who's head of public policy at Guardian Media Group. And he had previously been at Virgin Media. Previous to that, he had been part of the Government Communication Review. And he had been in the private sector as well, but had begun work as a parliamentary researcher. So that's just to put this in a bit of context. The scale and scope of digital titans, he's talking about Facebook and Google, means that they touch the lives of almost every citizen, business and media organisation. Facebook and Google account for 8 out of 10 of the most used mobile apps in the US. Such power means that a tweak to newsfeed algorithm here or a change to a platform policy there can have a dramatic impact on other businesses or publishers in their orbit. And he's concerned that while established publishers take responsibility for the content they host through shared editorial codes, spectrum-based regulation, and primary liability for publication, the tech platforms face much weaker standards of liability. The media agency WPP has published, he says, research suggesting that almost a quarter of global digital spend, $16.4 billion, was lost to ad fraud in 2017. And of course, he's absolutely concerned about the rise of fake news and misinformation. So he's basically saying that Silicon Valley needs to be regulated in a similar way to the mainstream media, and he's saying that they need to be held to account for ad revenue to make sure that that goes into the right hands, by that the mainstream media. But again, we have, Brian, another article emanating from government stroke mainstream media, which is complaining about the effect of people discussing reality on social media and the need to shut that down.
Got to be shut down. Well, let's bring in this one. The headline from Plymouth's local paper, The Herald, streets on lockdown in police drama. Photograph a bit small there, but you're looking at armed police. And this is all about the case of a man believed to be in possession of a knife. What do they say? There's amazing quotes in the paper itself. Let's have a look here. Traffic in the Prince Rock area of Plymouth ground to a halt as part of the A374 Embankment Road eastbound was closed. Dozens of residents were prevented from returning to their homes, while those inside were told to keep their doors and windows locked. Police confirmed that the siege was centred around a residential property in the area. Kerry, who lives on Britannia Place in Prince Rock, said she was asked to collect her son, aged 10, at 3:30 after his after-school club was cut short. There was a police drone flying. My dog ran out, but I stepped outside to grab him and bring him back indoors. And then the article ends, a man is believed to have been arrested yesterday afternoon. The road reopened. So the inference is that a man was believed to be in possession of a knife, and we've got armed police on the streets. This is
masked armed police.
Mike, this is so dangerous, and people just do not get it. Masked, armed police, automatic weapons, riot shields, major lockdown for a man believed into a possession of a knife. What would the police have said in the 50s? If there was a report of a man with a knife, the police would have gone round there. All they would have had is their truncheons and their bare hands, and they would have gone and done a job. These men have got tasers, but we need automatic weapons.
Yeah.
People need to wake up pretty quickly. And of course, the Herald completely missing the point about the dangers of what's really going on here.
Absolutely. Well, it isn't just Plymouth. Right around the country, we've got this type of nonsense. So the City of London was in lockdown this morning, a whole range of headlines on this. This is a later report from City AM saying that City of London police removed cordons from area around the Gherkin, which is one of the big tall buildings in the City of London, after suspicious package turns out to be discarded electrical item. So fear ramping through the press, and the BBC takes a biscuit though. Fire crews deal with hazardous substance in Wimple Green, so some tiny little rural area in deepest Dorset, and we're creating big headlines about something that happens in rural areas from time to time. There might be a spillage from agricultural, some kind of agricultural operation, but they push this type of headline out in order to scare the hell out of people.
Think it through. Somebody could have trodden on some of the Novichok powder in Salisbury, got in their car, driven to Wimple.
Yes. So the media is on trial, and it needs to be. So get along to this event in Leeds, 27th of May, if you possibly can. Mediaontrial.uk is where you can find out more information. Now, David, Fresh Start Foundation, something has happened.
Yes, we're organising our next meetings, our next roadshows. The next one's week Saturday in Dundee, and that's all going ahead. And the one after that is in Inverness. We were having some difficulty getting confirmation from the community centre in Inverness, where we had booked a hall. Transpires were not wanted. I think you've got a short audio clip here.
Okay, so let's have a listen to this, and then you can talk about it.
It's just really to see, just so you see if there's confirmation for the event, for the...
Due to the nature of the booking, I discussed it with our management team, and they've asked me for the minutes to hold off on the booking.
Right, can I just say something? Who's the manager? Who is that person?
That's gone right to the very top of High Life Highlands, so there's various different principal managers and heads of service that are involved.
Have you got any one person that I would be able to relate to?
What you could do is, if you want to type out an email, I could forward it to them.
So you can't actually tell me who the person is?
I don't want to individually give out. I'm not supposed to do that, no, because
Do you know something, Katrina? This is really, really strange. We've already had 2 road shows put on. The first one in Edinburgh, the second one was in Stirling, well attended, in community centres with no issue. I wonder, what is Inverness hiding that they find such a subject which should be out there? It happens in every community and it shouldn't be hidden, and I'm absolutely shocked and surprised that there would be an issue about this, and obviously I will be taking this further.
To say that it can't go ahead, but it's just something that is being discussed at senior management level.
Yeah, and when are they going to actually make a decision? Because we need to actually get this booked up so we can put posters out.
I mean, you're booking, what was the date again that you're booking this
for the 14th of April.
Yes.
And we need to put, we always put our posters out at least 2 weeks in advance.
I think it is highly unlikely that you are going to be able to book that date with us.
And that is because that they seem to have an issue around child sexual abuse and satanic abuse. Is that correct?
No, that's not.
So what is the problem then? Because the rooms that are available, I did confirm.
What I can do is I can give you pass on your number.
No, what I'd like you to do is to tell me the reasoning. I'm asking you, what is the reasoning? If they're finding it difficult to, let us have this booking because of the content, as you said in the beginning of the conversation, what's the problem?
It's in regards to how you're. There's a whole wide variety of reasons.
Well, give me at least one or two.
As I say, I'm not permitted to do that. I don't. It's up to my manager. My line manager's above me to make that decision.
Right. Well, and they're saying basically what? What is the response you're supposed to give to us?
The criticism that you're against the government, and they're
against the government. Against the government. No one's against the government. We challenge the inquiry. But the government are not supposed to be part of that.
I think we just find it's very confrontational, the way that...
why do the other councils have no issue with it?
Well, as I say, my head of service may be in the process of discussing with the other councils, and it may be that they're able to, once they've spoken to them, decide that it's okay for the booking to go ahead.
David, I'm almost speechless.
We were almost speechless too. That was Katrina Fraser, who had been given the job of telling us that our custom was not wanted, but clearly the decision came from higher up, much higher up, at the very top of the council. The organisation she works for is Highland High Life, which is one of these charities that have been spun off from a local authority in order to manage all the leisure and recreation facilities. Most Scottish local authorities anyway have these. Now, ultimately it's the council that makes the decision. And you heard there that in fact the council is now liaising with all the other Scottish councils to decide what the policy is with respect to the Fresh Start Foundation. Let us remember that we are simply independently inquiring into child sexual abuse and satanic ritual abuse, and all of a sudden that's anti-government. That's a surprise.
Well, it's not a surprise if the government's involved.
Well, this is true. Yes, it's highly suspicious. And did you pick up obviously the fear in the staff here, because Katrina Fraser wouldn't say who had given her this instruction. So it's an anonymous decision from an anonymous bureaucrat, and she wouldn't say what the decision was, because it's just, well, we'll get back to you, but only after your event has passed. And she wouldn't say what the reasoning was. Right? Very strange phone call. A lot of fear in that organisation, that she can't obviously feel that she can stand up to her managers, and she can't. She's so afraid to say anything, that she feels it's necessary to keep the deliberations secret.
Yes.
Yep. David, this is an absolutely key point, and I'm going to stand up for Katrina a little bit, because we see this all the time, that the person at the front end of an organisation that has to interface with the general public is the one that has to take the heat, while the other people who are really culpable hide in the background. So I'm going to say I can imagine this lady being under immense pressure, but we've now got the answer, because if it is a conference on child abuse to get this subject out in the open, and we now have councils having secret meetings behind closed doors to block Fresh Start, there can be only one reason: that they are very frightened people, because they must be involved in child abuse as organisations. There can only be one reason.
This is true. There can only be one reason, and I do share your sympathy for the person on the front end. We are starting to see some information coming out of Highland that is, shall we say, concerning, and to do with organisational decisions, to do with redeployment of staff and things like this, that are clearly being made at high level, and they're not being made, as far as we can see, in the best interest of the people of the Highland area. So yes, lots of questions for them to answer. We'll be looking forward to raising this matter further with Highland High Life, with the Highland Council, because there can be only one, and we will see what happens with the other Scottish local authorities. It will be fascinating sight to behold.
David, we're supposed to be out of time, but I think we should run through a few more of these. So let's start with Peter Kirby, and well, this is Angus MacDonald, MSP, tweeting: "I was very pleased today at the SP Petitions Committee to sign off a letter to the Justice Secretary and the Lord President calling for a register of judicial interests. This petition has been in the Scottish Parliament since December 2012, but today moved to the next stage." Now, this, I believe, is Peter Kirby's petition. Is that right?
This is correct, yes. After 6 years, 25 hearings, it's now gone from the Petitions Committee to the government with a recommendation that there should be a register of judicial interests. And the comment here from Peter Kirby: "Key evidence from Judicial Complaints Review of Moya Ali in September 2013 was, I believe, the turning point and a key moment where the proposal for a register for judicial interests gathered steam." It was, of course, opposed consistently by the Scottish judiciary, but it seems that we are going to have some openness despite their wishes.
And we'll just put this one up. This is Norway, my lord. Judicial Interest Register of Norway cited as example to follow for Hollywood MSPs. 6 years investigation to create a register of judges' interests in Scotland.
Yes, very interesting one, this. Full-time and professional judges are covered if appointed or employed for a period exceeding 1 month. Interests in Norway cover membership, offices and other forms of commitment other than a company, organisation or association or body of state, county or local authority. So maybe that's why the judges don't want a register of interests. They're worried what interests might eventually have to be revealed.
Okay, and we're going to end then on the Nazi saluting dog.
Oh, it's just been awesome. Now, this is, excuse me, this is has produced many strange things. I even found an article from CNN that was good, and I agreed with it. And I'll just quote it a little bit because it gives the very succinctly the background to this. Mark Meeking of Coatbridge, Lanarkshire, was found guilty in Airdrie Sheriff Court of a hate crime on Monday. His hate crime: his girlfriend constantly annoyed him by saying how cute her dog was. He wanted to annoy her back, so he filmed himself teaching the little pug dog called Buddha to raise its paw any time he said Sieg Heil. He also put the dog in front of a TV playing Adolf Hitler speaking at 1936 Olympics and asked the dog, "Do you want to gas the Jews?" Meekin posted the video on YouTube with the title, "Mate, your dog's a Nazi," and CNN explained here this is Scottish for "Mate, your dog is a Nazi." At the end of the video, he clearly says he was not racist, but just wanted to annoy his girlfriend. Despite hearing from Meekin that the video was mainly a joke, he had no intent to offend anybody. Aside from his poor girlfriend, he was found guilty of being grossly offensive, which is a violation of Section 127 of the UK Communications Act, which prohibits grossly offensive, indecent, obscene, menacing, and menacing electronic communications. So that's the background. That's what's happened. You had a YouTube personality and comedian make a joke, and it's clearly a joke. Whether you find it funny is not really the point. It's clearly a joke, and he has been singled out. by the Scottish state for prosecution. Now, 3 million people viewed this video of the Nazi dog. And out of the 3 million, there were 0 complaints. So it wasn't that offensive. But it did offend Police Scotland, and it did offend the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal Service, and they decided to prosecute. And he's been found, after the usual long, drawn-out Scottish legal process, he's been found guilty. We don't yet know what the sentence is going to be. That we won't find that out till April. Now, the interesting thing is the reaction. The reaction from all around the world has been to recognise this as an assault on free speech, and there have been just a wave of derision coming in the direction of Police Scotland, and less so in the Crown Office because people don't know who they are. But yeah, Police Scotland have been catching this for basically bringing Scotland as a nation into complete disrepute. Here's Taggart alerting people that there's been a tweet.
And for our American listeners and viewers, Taggart is a Scottish TV cop, equivalent to Kojak, I suppose.
Yes, Kojak from Glasgow, and his catchphrase was "There's been a murder," right? But here we don't have murder, but there's been a tweet. And do you have any other?
Yes, I've got 4 of them here. So we got Korea Kim saying, "Does no one feel sorry for the fascists at Police Scotland? They've had over 2,500 nasty responses to their email threatening people about being nasty. Most accounts would have been blocked by now."
Now, if you want to look at this is wonderful. If you go and get this Police Scotland tweet, which is threatening people about what they put online, and look at the responses, they are glorious, funny. It's just a wave of "No, we do not consent to this, you fascist," coming back from the internet. Really quite an interesting line to follow that. Next one.
Congratulations, you've made a once great country total. We better not.
Yes, total excrement. So again, this is coming from people who are just outraged at the persecution of someone for telling a joke. This man could either get 6 months to a year in jail for telling a joke. I think it's 6 months is the maximum sentence for this one. It's ridiculous.
David, I've just got to respond very quickly. What's in my mind straight away is the report we had a couple of days ago of a young Egyptian girl who's attacked by a gang of girls on a bus. She subsequently dies, and the BBC says with great joy, "Oh, this is not a hate crime." And yet we've got a man who teaches his dog to do a Nazi salute, and somebody backs him up, and it is a hate crime. This, on one hand, you could say is madness, but it is not madness. This is orchestrated policy to interfere with the way people think and behave. And of course, it is a massive assault on free speech. And I've got to say, if there's anybody sitting there thinking that this article about the dog being taught to salute is not important, I'm going to say I think it's one of the most important articles that we've ever covered, because this shows you where the state is going. You're not going to be able to think. You're not going to be able to have a conference about the abuse of children, because that's regarded as a terrorist attack on the government. This thing is coming to the surface now, and it does not look very pretty.
And just to finish, you mentioned terrorist attack. There's a book written about Dunblane. This is it here, Dunblane, Unburied by Sandra Utley, who was a resident of the town. You cannot get this in Dunblane Library. You cannot get this in Stirling District Libraries, and I suspect you won't be able to get it in any library in Scotland. That's because this book, which is looking at the evidence on what actually happened at Dunblane and trying to piece it all together in a very sensible, measured and thorough way, has been deemed terrorist material by Stirling Library Service. So you're not allowed to buy it.
Wow. Okay. Well, look, we'll end on this. Just a reminder of AV9 taking place 4th to the 7th of May in Horwood House Hotel near Milton Keynes. Brian speaking, Alex Thompson speaking, Patrick Henningsen speaking, and a whole bunch of other fantastic speakers. The theme for this is humanity on the cusp. And I think increasingly we can see what we're on the cusp of, Brian.
We can. Okay, David, thank you very much for joining us. Pretty sensational news today, I think. Somebody's asked if we could make that audio clip blocking the Fresh Start conference. Could we make that audio clip available so that people can promulgate it over the internet? I think we should try and do that. And of course, you're now seeing it for what it is. This is why that Southwark court case was closed down, where the man was planning to video the abuse and murder of children. Don't worry, because the ultimate clients, he said on tape, were top politicians. Wall of silence over that court case. We'll leave you with that thought. Britain's politicians, some of them at least, have been involved in abuse and the cover-up of that abuse of children. That's it for today. We will be back at the same time on Monday. Have a good weekend.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.